Welcome everyone to Activista Rise Up. I am Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina. Today I have the pleasure to have as my guest a very special woman who I have met in so many rallies and marches and so many efforts to drive issues of social justice right here in New Jersey. Charlene Walker is the Executive Director of Faith in New Jersey. Welcome, Charlene. So good to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. This is such a difficult time for everybody. I know that we're all managing so many things with our personal lives and our work and with so many issues impacting our community. So I know that the organization that you lead, is at the forefront of a lot of the issues around the pandemic and how workers and our communities are suffering. So why don't you tell me a little bit first about what Faith in New Jersey is and what do you do, so that then we can begin the conversation there.
All right, thank you. So Faith in New Jersey actually is part of a national organization, which is called Faith in Action. We are the largest faith-based organizing entity in the country, as well as internationally. We are in places such as Haiti, part of Central America, and currently in Ghana. So what we do is we organize people of faith and people of good conscience in order to seek justice within their communities. We are people of color. We're people with disabilities. We are justice impacted people that are formerly incarcerated. We're youth. We are undocumented immigrants. We are people who have seen in our communities exactly what's hurting us and have decided to come together to mobilize to change those systems. We believe in something called radical love and action, which extends beyond the walls of our houses of worship, because all too often, I think people believe, especially within this pandemic, people were saying, oh, the church is closed. The church is never closed. Houses of worship have never closed. So we move people of faith into our communities to fight for justice.
That is so essential for how we, use who we are and what we bring to this work to drive, action within our communities and the people who are most impacted. I see that how religious leaders work with that community is so essential. I follow a lot the work of Reverend William Barber in his Poor People's Campaign, and how he talks about, the whole idea of what you mentioned in radical love, and about how people of faith are about building justice on our everyday interactions, whether it be in our communities, in our work, wherever we are. So how do you bring leaders of faith into this work? Like perhaps the religious congregations, how do they connect with the work that you are doing with their congregants? How does that work happen?
Thank you for that question. So as far as how do we connect people, we work with, yes, faith leaders, but we essentially work within their congregations to set up congregational teams. I like to tell a story, if I have like a quick minute, about how we work within our communities and what we usually tell within our faith communities. There was once a village, and the village was next to a river. And down that river, one day a woman is sitting there and she notices there's baby floating down the river. And she runs and jumps into the river and pulls that baby out. And as she looks back, she realizes that there are more babies coming down that river. So what does she do? She does what community always does. She grabs different people and they all organize and they start pulling the babies out of the river. And what ends up happening is there's this man that's walking by, and the man that's walking by, they start yelling at him, help us, help us, help us. There are babies coming down the river, and he keeps walking. And people are like, this guy must be crazy. Like, who's going to let babies drown within the river, right? And they start yelling and screaming, help us, help us, help us. And he goes, I'm going to go up the river and see who's throwing babies down the river, right? So what we do is I tell that story because oftentimes within our faith communities, we're focused on the immediate needs of people, right? People are hungry. We're so focused on like, let's make sure that we feed people, and we need to make sure that we feed people, right? But at some point, we need to go up the river and figure out why are so many people that are hungry are coming to our doorstep and how we can change that system. So what we do is we get people to identify that we need to do both, right?
Yeah.
And we sit within our faith communities with our religious leaders, and we start to have those conversations among the members of the community. And then we find what our shared interest is. And then from that, we decide on the things that we want to work on. Is it that we need to become a sanctuary congregation? Is it that we need to maybe there's urban gun violence that's occurring outside our doorstep? Maybe we need to figure out how to address that. And that's how we begin to move.
Yeah, that is such an amazing story, because it's so true that we worry about the immediate crisis and then forget that there's a root to the cause of the problems that we're facing. So I love that. I might have to steal it from you, but it's such a good way to focus our energy also on who has the power to change the reality of our problems. And I know that you do work a lot with youth of color, for them to understand what their role is, perhaps to look at the systematic problems. So can you share a little bit of how you bring that intersectionality of race, of age, of ableness to the work that you are doing to empower youth of color to do this work, connected to their faith, but also to challenge the status quo in their community so that they can really know who's at the top of the river?
So I am a firm believer that justice is rooted in our relationships and begins at our intersections, right? So we start first and foremost by building real relationships. All too often, we're told in this world that my story doesn't matter and that I shouldn't share it, that we become quiet. My trauma, my struggle is mine and mine alone. Yeah. So first we start off by unmasking that and getting people to really tell those stories. Right now, we've just not passed, but I think we're still within this moment of great uprisings across our country, right? Yeah. Led by amazing youth. And as an organizer, what has made me so in awe and so happy in this moment is that our youth are very clear on what is causing our issues, and they understand what it is that they want. And our job is to help get them in the room with everyone else so that we can figure out who is at play. We do this through something called research meetings. So once we bring people together, we start actually sitting down and having good intentional conversations with decision makers and finding out who has the power here, who has power over them, and how do we move that power to do the things that we need. We believe that we take what we have to get what we want for what we need, right? Yeah. And we do this, we believe in, when we're talking about the intersections of youth and Black and Brown, we also have to bring them together with our elders that have been in the struggle for a while, because there is wisdom in previous moments, right? Yeah. And I think that what makes Faith in New Jersey so successful is the fact that we are so intersectional between youth, between our justice impacted loved ones, our undocumented community. And it's really hard. I've had legislators and decision makers tell me when we show up in the room that they don't know how to divide us afterwards. Because what happens often when you go and you meet with decision makers, if it's only the undocumented community that shows up, right? Yeah. Then they're like, oh, well, this is an undocumented issue. But when we realize that this is a human rights issue and it's the undocumented community, it's also a Catholic priest that shows up, it's also a Black youth that shows up, it's an imam, it's everybody, because it's the whole community's problem. We can't be divided. Yeah. And then we build that power and we make our demands and we win.
Yeah. And that is the kind of power that we ought to build moving forward, independently of what happens during this election. I think that the power that comes from the different members of our community coming together and defining a new vision for what do we want our community to be and our country to be, I think that is what's going to build power beyond November 3rd. So, because I think this is not about politics for electoral purposes, but it's about politics for deciding who takes control of the resources to invest in our communities. So with that idea, I know that you are engaged in so many issues in New Jersey, doing that kind of youth engagement and religious engagements. What are some of the campaigns that you are working on right now, and how do you see them moving forward beyond November 3rd, independently of what happens with our elections?
Yeah, so this election, I think this election season, right, because it's a season now, that it's a very unique election season, but what we believe, part of our work right now is actually mobilizing people to vote, because we do believe that about the power to vote, but we're voting, right, as organizers to set the table for the stage on who and what we can organize around in the future, right? And looking at what are some of the things? So all of our organizing is deeply built within listening within our communities. So there will be a season of that we've started of doing deep listening. One of the things we actually just did across New Jersey, and I think it might be the first time it's ever occurred, is we actually listened to over 100 undocumented immigrants that span the entire state from different backgrounds to find out, you know, what are their dreams for the future? What should we be putting on the table and fighting for? And we found things about the trauma that has occurred and how do we move past that, right? So part of what we're working on is building fair and welcoming policies within New Jersey for immigrants, and making sure that we get the implementation of the driver's licenses legislation that passed in December, and that it's implemented in a way that is fair and includes everyone, right? So I'm really excited about that.
And that it fulfills the commitment that was made through the legislation, right? To give everybody
exactly. Another thing that we're working on, or we are anchoring something called the Bring the Heat campaign, which is an organizing strategy around transforming the public safety system or policing. So we're working within some municipalities and cities on that level, but then also on the statewide level, we're working to end qualified immunity, which I think is going to be a game changer as far as accountability within policing, and also making sure that we have full transparency. There's a piece of legislation now that would allow the release of disciplinary records around policing. Also, the other things that we're working on is a piece of legislation to cover all kids for medical insurance. So, you know, in New Jersey, there's over 80,000 children, mostly Black and brown, that don't have medical insurance. So that's one of the things, but we work within several buckets between our Live Free campaign, which is also decarceration, and really building an intentional movement of what we call street certified organizers, or all people that are formerly incarcerated, and with all of the people that are going to be released due to the health credits bill, there's momentum for us to organize to dismantle this system. So those, I think, are our big things that we're working on, but we organize locally, statewide, and on the federal level. So there's lots to look out for.
Lots to look at. You know, this already showed that the incarceration and helping figure out how to create communities that welcome those who, you know, have been unjustly incarcerated, either for a small possessions of marijuana, which is one issue that is up in the balance right now, or for any other minor possessions, and they're coming out. And how do you prepare the communities to welcome them and to be able to offer them an opportunity to sort of redo their lives? I think that that's such a key issue for a lot of our poor communities, even with immigrants who get incarcerated by ICE. I think that's like the blowing growth that we have had. And that demonstrated how both of our communities are really suffering the brunt of big policing, of oppression in policing. So changing that mentality that policing is about building community, should be about building community, not about oppressing people. I think that the faith leaders like yourself and the people in your group have been key in driving that point, that we're not against policing, we're against police brutality in our communities.
Yeah, we're for public safety. Yesterday, we just did an event within Summit of reimagining public safety and really talking about what it is. Because the reality is that policing was never born from our imagination. Policing came to terrorize anybody that wasn't a rich white male. As it evolved, it went from slave patrols for immigration reports enforcement towards the labor, trying to hold down labor unions.
Yeah.
So how do we build public safety? What we know for safety is that safe communities have more resources. And then when we're looking at the criminal justice system, we've criminalized being poor. How do we organize to decriminalize being poor? Why are we running our townships off the backs of poor people that can barely make the income in order to put food on the table? Yeah. So that's a lot of what we'll be working on this year.
I always get surprised how in the United States, part of the system of capitalism and oppression and slavery has always made this to elevate the idea that we can all have the ability to become successful, but if something happens and you fall into poverty, that's your own fault. And how, sort of like that sense of who's responsible for creating the place where all of us can be successful. So I feel like we need to go back to that mentality that we have, that as a society, we create programs and policies that elevates everyone. And at the end of the day, that's who the society is, if we bring everybody up. But I feel like in the last 25 years, the idea that somebody's poor has become their responsibility and not society's responsibility to fix. Switching that, I think, is key as we move forward into how do we transform our political system. So it takes more responsibility for the policy decisions that they make, not to invest in people's and their abilities.
Exactly. And I think that organizing is deeply about investing in people. It's deeply about making sure, because I think all too often we're told this lie that little old me can't do this. Mm-hmm. Little old me doesn't have the ability to change my community. So it's all about pushing back on that narrative and really lifting people to understand that we have everything that we need. We just need to come together and build power together.
Yes. Yes. Tell me, how did you get into this work? Tell me a little bit about you. You talk about how you were well suited to do this work because of your upbringing. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. What was the work of justice?
Yeah, so since I got this position, I've been reflecting a lot about like how in the world did I get here? And I think that the story of my life, all of the ups and downs from inception, are how I actually got here. Actually, when I was born, I was placed up for adoption immediately. So I went from Trenton, New Jersey to Hillside to a foster home. And I like to say, I was so cute, my mom decided to keep me. So I was lucky. I grew up in a foster home, though. She did foster care up until I was about in 5th grade. And growing up in the house of foster care that was multicultural and multi-faith, I really got to see firsthand the systems that were hurting people, right? Mm-hmm. So I got to see the difference between the response to, say, the crack epidemic and how people were being pulled apart from their families instead of people having the option of treatment. Mm-hmm. I got to see my mother was this little petite Black woman that only spoke English, but in Hillside, there is a warehouse district. And we had a large amount of undocumented immigrants that worked in that area. And somehow they would walk past our house and they would see a backyard full of kids. And they would sit at a woman would sit at my table with my mother who spoke only English, and this person spoke really broken Spanish. And somehow they would negotiate that their children would be safe for my mother to watch them. Right. So like undocumented people are my people. Children that have been pulled apart from their families are my people. And I grew up, because our household was so diverse, my mother always let me go with whomever I want to explore faith. So I went to a temple. I went to a Lutheran church, a Catholic church, a Baptist church. And I learned very quickly on the value of faith and how it really moved people to action, from being in my church youth group and speaking out I want to say maybe when I was about 14 at Stations of the Cross and really starting to develop my own analysis of what was at play and what I saw playing out in our communities. And then just the story of my life, fast forward, I've worked with people that had developmental and intellectual disabilities, and I was an organizer for that community, as well as for at-risk youth.
Yeah.
So organizing there and then organizing with the faith community, somehow it just all brought everything together, especially when I got to become part of Faith in New Jersey. I was a leader within Faith in New Jersey. So for a while, for years, I was volunteering as a leader with Faith in New Jersey to fight all of these systems. So I was really happy when all of a sudden I became the executive director. I've been blessed.
Yeah. Awesome. It feels like you're driving, you're doing this work from a place of your own values and your own experience. And that is amazing, because I think that when we're able to do what we love, we can, we can do so much from that. And to be able to do this work, you have to sort of pull yourself into it, do it from a place of purpose. So I'm so glad to hear how you're connected to it and how you build from it. I want to lift up something you said about how you grew up around a community that was diverse and you're friends with, diverse. And I think that that's one difference that we have in the movements of even for immigrant justice, of social justice or racial justice with Black Lives Matter. Young people are together. They don't see the separation that perhaps some of our older generation had to face, because we didn't have the web. We had our communities always being separated, so we sort of had dealt with our own. So how do you see that intergenerational, multicultural, and young people being more willing to be in each other's shoes than before? And they're not accepting this division that perhaps too many immigrants are, would just cause us Black people to be less, to have less access to things, which is that's like the Republican message when they're talking to our community separately.
So recently this summer, we did something like almost a reckoning of white faith communities and what their stance has been throughout history around racism and separation. And one of the things that came out of that was they did a walk that went from Charlottesville, Virginia to the March on Washington. And I bring this up because one of the faith leaders was reflecting on it with me, and they brought up that they had this belief based off of everything that they saw with all the marches about the diversity within the youth that were marching, that they were like, you know what, us old people are going to die out, and then we would have solved like racial justice. And he said what brought him back was, as they were marching, the fact that there were youth that were yelling vulgar, racist things to them. So that there's still this work that needs to be done, even though we do see within the movement, we see some people coming together. I think we're really blessed in the amount of people that are coming together, but I don't want us to think that all the work is done. Like, we really need to dig. And as we're bringing people together to really dig and have these deep conversations, and also have the intergenerational conversations where people start to see each other so we can move forward. So I think that we're ahead of the curve with our youth, but there's still work to be done.
Yes, there's still so much work to be done, but I think that as we enter this space in which we have to push back against white nationalism and this idea that this is, not a white country or not a multi-religious, multi-diverse cultural country, that we have to figure out how to create those spaces to have those conversations and enforce, that contention, so that we can rupture into something new. So how can people join your efforts here in New Jersey? Like, what campaigns are like right on that we need to get to work on this legislature, and how they can support you doing that work?
Well, I think one of the easiest ways to get connected is if you go to our Faith in New Jersey Facebook page. There's actually pinned at the top a sign-up sheet. It's a little form, and when you fill it out, I I actually get contacted, and you'll get and you'll get a call directly from me about, just to have a one-on-one conversation about the things that are important to you, so we can figure out how that you can plug in. How can you plug in your neighborhood? And if for some reason we haven't set up a group within your neighborhood, even though we are currently reaching every single county in New Jersey, which I can't believe. I'm so excited. We will help you to bring your neighbors together to do the things that you think are necessary.
Yeah. I am a Catholic. I grew up in the church, but in a church that focused around theology of liberation and helping poor people find their own power through organizing and understanding their own reality. So I always tell people that my work is grown through my faith, that I believe that anybody from any circumstances has the ability and the right to be the best that they can be. And that's what I believe my church is, and my faith is, and that's what I work from. So for other women who perhaps are in different denominations, because I believe religion, we all come from the same values of loving each other and loving people. So how do you tell anyone who isn't really figuring out how to bring their congregation along to do that work and to unite with you guys to drive an agenda of social justice and love, radical love for every member in your community? Yeah.
Thanks for that. Every faith tradition has a belief in inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Yeah.
And once we begin to identify what does that mean, how do we see each other fully as human, I think that that's when our values push us to go into the moral square, to give a moral mandate of how this world should and could be. What our faith teaches us is that if we truly believe to love thy neighbor, that means that we need to make sure that we do all we can for those that don't look like us, don't pray like us, don't have necessarily the same beliefs that we do, and come together through deep conversations to find what our shared interests are in order to move around those issues. Because you'll find out, just because I might be have a Fortune 500 company and make a ridiculous amount of money, definitely not me, but somebody does, right? And somebody that works within the warehouse. When you start to have these conversations, you find out, guess what? We both still believe that our children need a good education.
Yeah.
We both still believe that my child should be able to come home at night safely and not be shot by the police, right? Yeah. And then we find those things and we'll start to move together.
Yes. It's so inspiring to hear you talk this language and this idea of radical love and how we can use our religious beliefs to embrace how we're all together and we ought to build a society that is just for everybody. So I thank you for being in this work, for bringing people together and bringing youth together to believe that they have power. It's so important as we move forward into challenging the economic systems that create oppression and poverty in our community. So thank you so much for that work. We will have all the information on how to get in touch with Faith New Jersey in our Facebook page. But anything that you want to say to close the show of for inspiration of how young people can connect with you and your work, please.
Thank you. So one thing I want to say to young people is that you've got this. You are very, very clear. And Faith in New Jersey just wants to help you to lead the movement. We would love to be able to support you. We'd love to be able to give you resources and training in order to move the things that you think are most important in your community, because you are the leaders that we need. You're the ones that are going to build this new future and that have this imagination that I think is possible. So please join us.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you for leading, and thank you for being here with me, Charlene.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. The work for social justice is an ongoing one, and we need to stay connected to our values and to our purpose. The work that Charlene does with Faith in New Jersey is just one example of how young leaders are leading in transforming our society. I am Dr. Patricia Campos-Medina, and this is Activista Rise Up. Thank you.